Captain Dong-Soo Kim stood at the observation deck of the research station Kepler-7, watching the stars through the massive transparent dome. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept holding the cup. Something about the warmth in his hands made him feel more human in this place full of aliens. The station buzzed with activity. Scientists from dozens of species worked together, studying everything from quantum mechanics to ancient history. It was supposed to be a symbol of galactic cooperation. Most days, Dong-Soo believed that. Today felt different. "Captain, they want you in conference room 7, said Bo-Ram Lee, his chief engineer. She walked up beside him, her boots clicking on the metal floor. Bo-Ram had worked with Dong-Soo for 3 years now. She could read his moods better than most. "Let me guess," Dong-Soo said, still looking at the stars. "The Omniplex has another prediction about us." Bo-Ram nodded. "The big one this time. 500 years of human development. They seem very excited about it." Dong-Soo finally turned away from the window. The Omniplex was the most advanced computer network in the galaxy. It had been built by the Galactic Confederation over 2 centuries ago. Every major species had contributed to its design. The result was a machine that could predict the future with scary accuracy. The Omniplex had correctly predicted 847 different species and their behaviors. It knew when wars would start and when they would end. It could tell you which planets would develop faster than light travel, and when. It had prevented countless conflicts by showing governments exactly what would happen if they made certain choices. The only species it struggled with was humanity. "How many times is this now?" Dong-Soo asked as they walked through the corridors. "7th major revision in 2 years, Bo-Ram replied. "Each time they think they have figured us out. Each time we do something that breaks their models." They passed a group of Vorthak scientists discussing mathematical formulas. The Vorthaks looked like tall, thin humans with blue-gray skin and no hair. They were known throughout the galaxy for their logical thinking. One of them, Quelm 9, nodded to Dong-Soo as they passed. "The humans approach," Quelm 9 said to his colleagues in his flat, emotionless voice. "Perhaps today we will understand their chaotic patterns." Dong-Soo smiled and waved back. He had learned not to take offense at how aliens described humans. Most species in the galaxy had evolved in very different ways. The Vorthaks valued logic above all else. The Zellarians prized honor and strength. The Krillians focused on efficiency and order. Humans were different. Humans were complicated. Conference room 7 was packed. Representatives from 16 different species sat around the curved table. At the center, a holographic display showed the familiar symbol of the Omniplex, a sphere covered in flowing data streams. Vextar, the Zellarian diplomat, stood as Dong-Soo entered. Zellarians were tall and muscular, with golden skin and proud bearing. "Captain Kim, we have been waiting for you. Today marks a historic moment in galactic understanding." "I am honored to be here," Dong-Soo replied, taking his seat. Bo-Ram sat beside him, along with Taeho Park, his security officer, and Eun-ji Choi, his communications specialist. They were the human delegation to Kepler-7. The holographic display changed, showing a complex web of data points and probability curves. The Omniplex had been studying humanity for 37 years, ever since first contact. Every human decision, every cultural development, every technological advance had been recorded and analyzed. "Beings of the Confederation," announced the artificial voice of the Omniplex, "I present the completed human behavioral matrix. After extensive analysis, I have achieved 99.7% accuracy in predicting human actions over the next 5 centuries. The alien representatives leaned forward with interest. This was what they had been waiting for. Humans were the newest species to join galactic society, and their unpredictable nature had caused problems. Trade disputes arose when humans made emotional decisions instead of logical ones. Diplomatic negotiations failed when humans acted on principles rather than profit. The display showed humanity's predicted future: steady expansion into nearby star systems, technological development following expected patterns, population growth curves that matched other species at similar development stages. Everything neat? orderly, and predictable. As you can see, the Omniplex continued, humans follow aggressive expansion patterns similar to the early Kethmoran Empire. However, their territorial ambitions are limited by their emotional attachments to individual planets. They will negotiate when faced with superior force. They prioritize survival of their genetic lineage above abstract concepts. Dongsu listened quietly. The prediction sounded reasonable on the surface. Humans did love their homeworlds. They did try to protect their families. They usually tried to avoid fights they could not win. But something felt wrong about it all. The key finding, the Omniplex announced, is that humans break under sufficient pressure in predictable ways. When faced with overwhelming odds, they will choose survival over ideology 94.8% of the time. When forced to choose between individual lives and abstract principles, they select practical outcomes in 87.3% of recorded cases. The alien delegates seemed pleased. This was the kind of information they needed. If you could predict how humans would react to pressure, you could negotiate with them effectively. You could avoid conflicts by knowing exactly how much force would make them surrender. Vextar spoke first. This analysis will greatly improve our diplomatic relations with humanity. We thank the Omniplex for its thorough work. Other delegates agreed. The Vorthak representatives nodded in their logical way. The Krillian ambassador made notes about trade implications. Everyone seemed satisfied that the human puzzle had finally been solved. Captain Kim asked Quelm 9, "Does this analysis match your own understanding of your species?" Dongsu looked around the room at all the alien faces watching him. These beings had spent decades trying to understand humanity. They had built the most powerful computer in the galaxy to predict human behavior. They believed they had succeeded. He thought about his own life. About the time his grandfather had refused to sell the family farm even when the company offered 10 times what it was worth. About his sister who had become a teacher instead of taking a high-paying corporate job because she wanted to help children learn. About his friend who had died trying to rescue strangers from a burning building. He thought about all the humans throughout history who had chosen impossible fights, who had stood up for principles that meant more than their lives, who had looked at overwhelming odds and decided to fight anyway. "It is very impressive work," Dongsu said carefully. "The Omniplex has clearly put great effort into understanding us." The alien delegates smiled, or made whatever expression their species used to show satisfaction. The meeting began to break up, with various representatives discussing how to use this new information. As they left the conference room, Yunji Choi walked beside Dongsu. "Captain, you did not really answer their question." Dongsu paused in the corridor. Through a nearby window, he could see his ship, the Resilience, docked at the station. It was not the biggest ship or the fastest ship, but it was home to his crew. "The Omniplex has made one critical error," he said quietly. "What is that?" asked Taiho Park. Dongsu looked at his 3 officers, Bo-Ram with her practical intelligence, Taiho with his quiet strength, Yunji with her gift for understanding others. They were good people. They were typical humans in many ways. "It assumes we always act in our own best interest," Dongsu said. "It thinks pressure will make us break in predictable ways. It believes survival is our highest priority." "Is that not true?" asked Bo-Ram. Dongsu smiled. "Sometimes. But the Omniplex has never seen what happens when humans decide that something is more important than surviving. It has never calculated what we do when we choose to care more about others than ourselves." He started walking toward their ship. "Come on, let us get back to work. I have a feeling the galaxy is about to get very interesting." Behind them, the Omniplex continued processing data, completely confident in its predictions. It had no way to know that in 3 months everything would change. It could not calculate the moment when humans would choose the impossible over the logical. The greatest computer in the galaxy was about to learn that some things cannot be predicted, only witnessed. 3 months had passed since the Omniplex announced its perfect understanding of human behavior. The galaxy had settled into a comfortable routine based on those predictions. Trade negotiations proceeded smoothly because everyone knew exactly how humans would respond to different offers. Diplomatic meetings became more efficient because alien ambassadors could calculate the best approaches to human psychology. Everything was working perfectly according to plan. Then New Busan changed everything. Governor Jin Woo-han stood in his office on the mining colony, looking at the message that had just arrived. The holographic display showed the unmistakable symbol of the Kethmoran Empire, a red spiral surrounded by sharp angles. The Kethmorans were known throughout the galaxy for their systematic approach to conquest. They never attacked without overwhelming force. They never offered terms they were not prepared to enforce. The message was simple and direct, as all Kethmoran communications were. Human colony designated New Busan. You occupy territory claimed by the Kethmoran Empire. Surrender administrative control within 72 standard hours or face orbital bombardment. This is your only warning. Jin Woo read the message twice, then called his senior staff. Within an hour, the colony's leadership had gathered in the small conference room of the government building. Chief Engineer Boram Lee had arrived from the Resilience, which had been visiting New Busan for routine maintenance. Security Officer Taeho Park sat beside her, his face grim. Communications Specialist Eun-ji Choi was already working on her portable equipment, monitoring galactic news feeds. "How many ships do they have?" asked Mining Director Soo-jin Park, a local woman who had lived on New Busan for 15 years. 43 vessels, replied Taeho after checking his scanner data, including 12 heavy battleships and 28 support craft. Our defensive capabilities consist of 6 orbital defense platforms and whatever weapons we can improvise. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the math. New Busan had 50,000 civilians, mostly miners and their families. The colony had been established only 8 years ago. It was valuable because of its rare mineral deposits, but it had never been intended as a military stronghold. "The Omniplex calculations are clear," said Dr. Kyung-soo Lim, the colony's chief administrator. "When faced with overwhelming force, humans choose survival over abstract territorial claims. We should begin evacuation procedures immediately." Jinwoo looked around the room. These people had built their lives here. They had carved homes out of raw rock. They had planted gardens in artificial soil. They had created a community where their children could grow up safely. "The Kethemorans are right about one thing," Jinwoo said slowly. "New Busan has valuable resources. If we abandon it, they will take everything we have worked for. Then they will move to the next human colony, and the next one after that. But we cannot fight them," protested Dr. Lim. "It would be suicide." Boram Lee had been quiet during the discussion, but now she spoke up. "Actually, we could make things very difficult for them." Everyone turned to look at the chief engineer. Boram had a reputation for creative problem-solving. She had once repaired a starship engine using nothing but mining equipment and spare parts from a food processor. "The mining operation has heavy equipment," Boram continued. "Rock crushers, excavation machines, transport vehicles. With some modifications, we could turn them into weapons. The underground tunnel system could be used for defensive positions." "You are talking about guerrilla warfare," said Taeho. "Against overwhelming odds, yes," Boram replied simply. Jinwoo stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see families going about their daily lives. Children were playing in the small park near the residential district. Adults were finishing their work shifts and heading home. It looked peaceful and normal, but overhead, enemy ships waited in the darkness. "What does the Omniplex predict we will do?" he asked Yoonji. The communications specialist checked her datapad. "Immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel. Negotiation for favorable surrender terms. Possible token resistance lasting no more than 6 hours before capitulation." "And if we choose to fight?" Yoonji hesitated. "The Omniplex gives us a 0.03% chance of military victory. It classifies extended resistance as illogical self-destruction serving no strategic purpose." Jinwoo smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was not a sad one either. It was the kind of smile humans made when they had decided to do something that everyone else would think was crazy. "Send a message to the Kethmoran fleet," he said. "What should I tell them?" asked Yunji. Jinwoo looked out at his colony one more time, at the homes people had built, the lives they had created, the future they had planned. Then he looked back at his staff, good people who had trusted him to lead them, who deserved better than surrender and exile. Tell them to come and take. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Dr. Lim stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. Governor, you cannot be serious. This is madness. Maybe, Jinwoo replied, but it is our madness. Within hours, word of New Busan's response had spread throughout the galaxy. News networks picked up the story with fascination and horror. The small human colony was defying the most systematic military force in known space. It made no sense, according to any logical analysis. On the Kethmoran flagship, Commander Thekmore stared at the human message in confusion. He had conquered 47 worlds using the same method: overwhelming force, clear ultimatum, rational surrender. It had never failed before. Are you certain this message is accurate? He asked his communications officer. Yes, Commander. The human response has been verified multiple times. Thekmore had studied human behavior patterns as provided by the Omniplex. Humans were emotional and unpredictable in small matters, but they followed logical survival patterns when faced with extinction. They were supposed to evacuate or surrender when confronted with impossible odds. Perhaps they do not understand the situation, Thekmore said. Send them detailed scans of our fleet. Show them exactly what they are facing. The scans were transmitted to New Busan. In response, Yunji Choi sent back a single image, a picture of the colony's flag flying over the government building. On Kepler 7 research station, the Omniplex began experiencing something it had never encountered before. Prediction. Failures. The system ran calculations over and over, but could not generate a logical explanation for human behavior. Quelm 9 and his Vorthak colleagues gathered around the data displays in confusion. The humans should have evacuated by now, Quelm 9 said. All probability models indicate immediate retreat. But instead of evacuating, the colonists were doing something else entirely. Boram Lee had organized teams of engineers and miners to convert industrial equipment into weapons. Rock crushers became artillery pieces. Mining charges became explosives. Transport vehicles became armored fighting machines. Taeho Park established training sessions for civilian volunteers. Men and women who had never held weapons were learning to fight. Teenagers who should have been studying for school were practicing radio communications and first aid. Most confusing of all, the humans were happy. Yunji Choi broadcast messages throughout the colony, coordinating defense efforts. But she also shared stories, jokes, and songs. The people of New Busan were not acting like a population facing annihilation. They were acting like neighbors helping each other prepare for a difficult but important task. I do not understand, Vextar said, as he watched the news feeds on Kepler 7. Why are they not afraid? Captain Dong-Soo Kim, who had been monitoring the situation from his ship, answered quietly. They are terrified, but they have decided that some things are more important than being afraid. The Kethmoran fleet waited in orbit, expecting the humans to come to their senses. Commander Thekmore had never encountered enemies who responded to overwhelming force with preparation and determination instead of fear and surrender. On New Busan, Jinwoo Han addressed his people over the colony-wide communication system. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke to the 50,000 souls who had chosen to stay and fight. Tomorrow they will come, he said. They expect us to run or surrender. They think we will choose survival over everything else we value. They believe they understand us. He paused, looking out at the lights of the colony spread below his office window. They are about to learn something about humans that no computer can calculate. Some things cannot be taken. They can only be given. And New Busan is not for sale. In space above the colony, instruments detected something the Kethmorans had never seen before. More human ships were arriving, not military vessels, but civilian, craft, cargo haulers, and personal ships. They came knowing they were flying into a war zone, knowing they could not change the odds, knowing they might not survive. They came anyway. The Omniplex tried to process this new data and failed. According to every model, every prediction, every logical analysis, humans facing certain defeat should disperse and seek survival elsewhere. Instead, they were gathering together, making themselves easier targets, reducing their own chances of escape. It made no sense, and that was exactly the point. The siege of New Busan had begun 3 days ago, and already the galaxy was watching in amazement. News networks from every major species were broadcasting continuous coverage of the human anomaly. What had started as a simple military conquest had become something no one could explain. Commander Thekmore stood on the bridge of his flagship staring at the tactical display. According to his instruments, the human colony should have fallen within hours. His fleet had conducted precise, orbital bombardments targeting key infrastructure points. The human defenses should have collapsed under the systematic assault. Instead, the humans had adapted. "Report," Thekmore commanded his tactical officer. "The mining colony continues to function at 67% capacity," came the reply. "They have moved critical operations underground. Our bombardment has destroyed 17 surface facilities, but the humans have created new command centers in the tunnel networks." Thekmore studied the data in confusion. The Omniplex had assured him that humans would surrender when faced with infrastructure damage. Losing their power plants, communication centers, and transportation hubs should have forced them to negotiate. Instead, Bo-Ram Lee had done something impossible. Using mining equipment and spare parts, she had created an underground power grid that actually worked more efficiently than the original surface systems. The humans were not just surviving the bombardment, they were thriving despite it. "Sir," said his communications officer, "we are receiving another message from the colony. Put it through." The holographic display showed Jin Wuhan standing in what appeared to be a converted mining shaft. Behind him, humans were working calmly at various tasks. Some were operating communication equipment. Others were preparing weapons. A few were actually cooking food and sharing meals. "Commander Thekmore," Jinwoo said politely, "we wanted to thank you for the target practice. Your bombardment has helped us test our new defensive systems. They work better than we expected." The message ended with something that made Thekmore's tactical officers exchange confused glances. The humans were singing, not a war song or a battle anthem, but a simple melody about their home world. They sounded happy. On Kepler 7 research station, the Omniplex was experiencing cascade failures throughout its prediction systems. Quelm 9 and his team of Vorthak scientists gathered around the main computer terminal, watching error messages appear faster than they could process them. "The system is generating contradictory analyses," Quelm 9 reported to the assembled alien delegates. "Human behavior patterns no longer match any known psychological profiles." Vextar, the Zalarian diplomat, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The Omniplex calculates that New Busan should have surrendered after the first day of bombardment. When that failed to occur, it predicted capitulation after the destruction of their primary power facility. When the humans continued to resist, it calculated that civilian casualties would force negotiation within 48 hours. And now?" Quelm 9 gestured at the display showing streams of error codes. "Now it cannot generate any reliable predictions about human behavior. The system keeps producing results that contradict its own fundamental assumptions." Meanwhile, something even more impossible was happening. More human ships were arriving at New Busan every hour. Captain Dongsu Kim had been the first to defy Confederation orders by bringing the resilience to the battle zone, but he was no longer alone. Captain Mi Young Song had arrived in a converted cargo freighter called the Lucky Dragon. She brought supplies, weapons, and 43 volunteers from nearby human colonies. When asked why she had come, her answer was simple: because they asked for help. Dr. Kyung-Ho Lim had somehow convinced the Confederation Medical Authority to let him bring a hospital ship into the war zone. He claimed it was for humanitarian purposes, but everyone knew he was really there to support the human resistance. His ship, the Mercy, had begun treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. That decision broke another algorithm. The Omniplex could not process why humans would provide medical care to their enemies. According to every logical model, Resources should be preserved for your own forces during wartime. It makes no strategic sense, Vexitar complained during an emergency session of the Alien Council. They are wasting medical supplies on Kethmoran wounded. They could use those resources to save their own people. Captain Dong-Soo Kim, who had been invited to explain human behavior, smiled patiently. Dr. Lim believes that suffering is the same, regardless of which species experiences it. He treats patients, not enemies. But this weakens their position, protested a Krillian representative. They cannot afford such inefficiency during a siege. Perhaps, Dong-Soo replied. But something interesting has happened. Kethmoran soldiers have begun requesting transfers to our medical facilities. They receive better care from their enemies than from their own commanders. This information caused another system crash in the Omniplex. Enemy soldiers preferring capture to remaining with their own forces violated every principle of military psychology. On New Busan, the impossible continued to multiply. Taeho Park had organized civilian defense teams that operated on principles no military academy taught. Instead of following rigid command structures, they made decisions collectively. Instead of focusing on killing enemies, they concentrated on protecting each other. The result was a fighting force that adapted faster than any conventional army. When the Kethmorans attacked from the north, the humans melted away into tunnel networks. When bombardment targeted their supply depots, they had already moved everything to new locations. When communication jamming cut off their coordination, they switched to backup systems that should not have worked but somehow did. How are they doing this? Commander Thekmore demanded during a strategy meeting with his officers. We do not know, sir, admitted his tactical advisor. Their responses do not follow any recognized military doctrine. They appear to be making tactical decisions based on emotional factors rather than strategic analysis. That should make them easier to defeat, not harder. Yes, sir. That is what our models indicate. But the models appear to be wrong. The breaking point came when Quelm 9 made a decision that shocked his entire species. The Vorthak scientist had spent weeks studying the human resistance, trying to understand their illogical behavior patterns. He had run countless analyses, generated thousands of probability calculations, and consulted every database in the Galactic Confederation. Nothing worked. The humans continued to act in ways that defied every scientific principle. So Quelm 9 did something unprecedented in Vorthak history. He abandoned his research station and asked to join the humans on New Busan. This is highly irregular, Vextar protested when Quelm 9 announced his decision. You are a scientist, not a warrior. Correct, Quelm 9 replied in his flat, logical voice. But I have concluded that the only way to understand human behavior is to observe it directly. My current analytical methods have proven inadequate. The request created chaos in the Confederation Council. No Vorthak had ever voluntarily placed themselves in danger for purely research purposes. Their species valued logic and safety above all other considerations. Joining a hopeless military cause violated every principle of Vorthak psychology. But Quelm 9 was determined. He had spent his entire career studying behavioral patterns of different species. The humans represented the greatest puzzle he had ever encountered. If understanding them required personal risk, he was willing to accept that cost. Within 24 hours, Quelm 9 was on New Busan, working alongside Boram Lee in the converted mining tunnels. The sight of a Vorthak scientist helping humans build improvised weapons created news headlines throughout the galaxy. Why are you here? Boram asked him during a quiet moment between construction projects. Quelm 9 considered the question with typical Vorthak precision. Because your species appears to operate on principles that transcend logical analysis. I wish to understand how this is possible. And if you die in the process? Then I will have learned something that cannot be discovered through safe observation. The Omniplex registered Quelm 9's decision and immediately experienced a complete systems failure. For the first time in its operational history, the great computer network shut down entirely, unable to process a universe where its fundamental assumptions no longer applied. Throughout the galaxy, species that had relied on Omniplex predictions for centuries suddenly found themselves without guidance. Trade negotiations halted. Military planning sessions were postponed. Diplomatic relations entered a state of uncertainty that no one had experienced in living memory. On New Busan, the siege continued. But something had changed. The humans were no longer fighting alone. Quelm 9 worked beside them, applying Vorthak analytical skills to human creative problem-solving. Dr. Lim treated patients of all species with equal care. Volunteers from across human space continued arriving, bringing supplies, expertise, and something even more valuable. Proof that the galaxy was watching and learning. Commander Thekmor received new orders from his superiors. The Kethmoran Empire was concerned about the galactic attention focused on New Busan. What should have been a simple conquest had become a symbol of something larger and more dangerous. Increase bombardment intensity, his orders read. Eliminate the human resistance quickly before their example spreads to other species. But as Thekmor prepared to escalate the attack, he noticed something troubling. Some of his own soldiers had begun asking questions. They wanted to know why they were fighting enemies who treated prisoners better than the Kethmoran Empire treated its own troops. They wondered why humans would risk their lives to help wounded Kethmoran soldiers. The virus of human behavior was spreading, and no computer system in the galaxy could calculate where it would lead. 2 weeks had passed since the Omniplex shut down completely. Across the galaxy, the greatest computer network ever built remained silent, its processing cores unable to handle a universe where logic no longer seemed to apply. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Confederation had produced no solutions, only more questions. The humans of New Busan had not just survived the escalated bombardment, they had turned it into an advantage. Boram Lee stood in her new workshop, 3 levels underground in what used to be a mineral processing plant. Around her, humans and the newly arrived Quelm 9 worked together on projects that should have been impossible. They were building weapons from farming equipment, communication systems from kitchen appliances, and defensive shields from materials that had no business stopping energy weapons. This violates several laws of physics, Quelm 9 observed as he helped calibrate a defensive array made from modified mining lasers. Welcome to human engineering, Boram replied cheerfully. If it works, we keep using it. If it does not work, we try something else. But the theoretical framework suggests these devices should not function. Boram wiped grease from her hands and looked at the Vorthak scientist. Quelm 9, has anyone told the devices that they are not supposed to work? The question caused something unprecedented in Vorthak psychology. Quelm 9 experienced what humans would recognize as the beginning of a sense of humor. His logical mind tried to process this new sensation, but found no adequate framework for understanding why he found the statement amusing. Above ground, the siege had taken on a carnival atmosphere that baffled every military observer in the galaxy. Instead of the grim desperation expected in a hopeless battle, New Busan had become a celebration of human stubbornness mixed with alien curiosity. Jin Wuhan had established daily broadcasts that reached not only the colony, but also the watching galaxy. These were not military briefings or propaganda messages. They were community meetings where colonists shared stories, sang songs, and talked about their lives as if they were not in the middle of a war zone. Today marks day 14 of our extended disagreement with our Kethmoran visitors, Jinwoo announced during one broadcast, his tone conversational and warm. The weather underground remains stable at 22 degrees. The hydroponic gardens are producing excellent tomatoes, and Mrs. Kim from Level 7 has volunteered to teach alien visitors how to make kimchi. The reference to Mrs. Kim was not random. 3 Kethmoran soldiers had been captured during a failed ground assault. Instead of being imprisoned in cells, they had been invited to help in the colony's communal kitchens while they recovered from their wounds. Dr. Kyung-ho Lim had treated their injuries with the same care he showed human patients, and now they were learning to cook human food alongside their former enemies. This development created panic throughout the Kethmoran command structure. Our soldiers are fraternizing with the enemy, reported Commander Thekmor's intelligence officer during the morning briefing. They appear to be enjoying themselves. Yesterday one was observed laughing with human children. Thekmor stared at the surveillance footage showing his captured troops genuinely smiling while learning to prepare food with human civilians. According to every principle of Kethmoran military doctrine, captured soldiers should maintain dignified silence until rescued or exchanged. They should never integrate with enemy populations. They certainly should not appear happy about their situation. Have they been subjected to mind control or chemical manipulation? Thekmor asked, searching for any logical explanation. Negative, sir. Medical scans show no signs of coercion, drugs, or mental manipulation. Brain activity patterns suggest they are cooperating voluntarily. They appear to genuinely enjoy the company of their captors. The situation became even more complex when additional human ships continued arriving from throughout galactic space. Captain Mi Young Song's converted freighter had been joined by dozens of other vessels of every description. They brought not only supplies and volunteers, but also alien observers from species that had never shown interest in human affairs before the siege began. Among the most notable arrivals was a Krillian cultural analyst named Veclon. The Krillians were known throughout the galaxy for their rigid efficiency and systematic social organization. They had always viewed humans as wastefully emotional and poorly organized. Veclon had come to New Busan expecting to study what he anticipated would be the final collapse of human resistance under pressure. Instead, he found something that challenged every Krillian assumption about proper social organization and military effectiveness. They have no centralized command structure, Veclon reported to his superiors via encrypted communication. Decisions are made through collective discussion involving civilians, military personnel, and even alien visitors. Resources are distributed based on stated need rather than rank, contribution, or strategic value. Military planning occurs through consensus building rather than hierarchical authority structures. This should result in chaos, inefficiency, and rapid defeat, came the response from the Krillian High Council. Yes, Veclon agreed, consulting his detailed observations. According to all established principles of organization theory, their system should have collapsed within days. But somehow it produces faster decision-making, more flexible tactical responses, and higher morale than our most efficient systematic approaches. The alien observer found himself particularly fascinated by Yoonji Choi's communication center. The human woman had created a network that connected not only the human defenders, but also the growing number of alien visitors, captured enemies, and observers from throughout the galaxy. She broadcast everything from tactical updates to cooking lessons to philosophical discussions about the nature of hope and community. Why do you include non-military information in your communications network? Veclon asked her during one of his interviews. Hyunji looked up from her equipment, which now included Vorthak analytical devices, Krillian efficiency protocols, and captured Kethmoran military hardware that somehow all worked together despite being based on completely incompatible design philosophies. Because we are not just fighting a war, she explained patiently. We are living our lives. The Kethmorans want us to surrender not just our colony but our way of being human. So we keep being human, even in the middle of battle. Actually, especially in the middle of battle. But this wastes time, energy, and valuable communication resources that could be used for tactical coordination. Does it? Yoonji gestured toward the main display, which showed the current operational status of the colonial defenses. Green indicators covered most of the screen. Our morale is higher than it has ever been. People work harder and more creatively when they feel connected to each other, and to something larger than immediate survival. Soldiers fight better when they remember what they are protecting, rather than just what they are fighting against. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Taiho Park Security Network. Another Kethmoran ground assault was beginning, the largest and most systematic yet attempted. Intelligence suggested that Commander Thekmor had received orders to end the siege quickly before the human example could spread further. What followed broke every established rule of conventional warfare and military psychology. Instead of meeting the attack with organized resistance from prepared positions, the human defenders simply vanished. Kethmoran troops found empty tunnels, abandoned defensive positions, and tactical equipment that had been left behind as if the humans had fled in sudden panic. The Kethmoran soldiers advanced cautiously through the tunnel networks, expecting ambushes that never came. Their instruments detected no human presence, no weapon signatures, no signs of preparation for resistance. Then the singing started. From speakers hidden throughout the tunnel network, human voices began performing songs from Earth, not military anthems or battle hymns designed to intimidate enemies, but simple melodies about home, family, friendship, and the small joys of daily life. The music echoed through the underground passages, following the Kethmoran soldiers wherever they went, growing louder as they advanced deeper into the colony. "What is the tactical purpose of this audio transmission?" demanded the Kethmoran assault commander through his communication system. The answer came from Jin Wuhan, broadcast on all frequencies so that every soldier could hear it clearly. "We wanted you to hear what we are fighting for. These are the songs our children sing when they are happy. These are the melodies our families share when they gather for meals. This is the culture you want to destroy. We thought you should know what it sounds like before you eliminate it." The psychological effect was devastating in ways no mealy. The word spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Through quantum communication networks, news feeds, and simple word of mouth, the story of New Busan reached every corner of civilized space. What had started as a simple siege had become something much larger and more dangerous, a fundamental challenge to the way the galaxy understood itself. On the Krillian homeworld of Systematic Prime, efficiency expert Dektor received reports that made no sense according to his species' carefully ordered worldview. Krillian workers throughout the galaxy had begun forming what they awkwardly called cooperation groups, voluntary associations that prioritized mutual support over individual productivity. "This is illogical," Dektor announced to his assembled staff. "Krillian social organization is based on optimal individual performance contributing to collective efficiency. These cooperation groups reduce measurable output by an average of 12%. His assistant, a methodical individual named Lochran, consulted his datapad. "That is correct, sir. However, worker satisfaction has increased by 47%, sick days have decreased by 31%, and voluntary overtime has increased by 63%. Dektor processed this information with growing confusion, but the net productivity loss remains 12%. "Yes, sir. But the workers report feeling happier about their reduced productivity than they previously felt about their higher output." The concept of prioritizing emotional satisfaction over measurable efficiency was so alien to Krillian thinking that Dektor required several minutes to formulate a response. When he did, his words would later be remembered as the first crack in Krillian social philosophy. "Perhaps there are forms of productivity that we have not learned to measure. On Vorthak Prime, the homeworld of logic and reason, even more dramatic changes were occurring." Inspired by Quelm 9's reports from New Busan, other Vorthak scientists had begun experimenting with what they termed intuitive research methods. Instead of following strict analytical protocols, they were allowing emotional responses to guide their investigations. The results were unprecedented. Vorthak researchers were making breakthrough discoveries by pursuing hunches, following curiosity, and exploring questions simply because they found them interesting rather than logically significant. Dr. Yulnav, the head of the Vorthak Science Council, found herself facing a crisis of understanding. "Our researchers are abandoning centuries of proven methodology," she reported to the planetary government. "They claim that emotional engagement with their subjects produces superior results to pure logical analysis. And do these emotional methods actually produce superior results?" asked the chief administrator. Yulanov hesitated before answering. "Yes, research productivity has increased by factors we cannot currently calculate. Our scientists appear to be more creative, more innovative, and more willing to pursue challenging problems." Then what is the nature of the crisis? The crisis is that this success contradicts everything we believed about the nature of intelligence and discovery. The human influence was spreading beyond scientific communities. Throughout Vorthak society, individuals were beginning to express something their species had never experienced before, what humans would recognize as personal preferences, unrelated to logical necessity. Some Vorthaks began choosing clothing based on visual appeal rather than functional efficiency. Others started decorating their living spaces with objects that served no practical purpose, but that they found pleasant to observe. A few even began creating what could only be described as art. The Zalarian Empire, proud warriors who valued honor above all else, faced their own transformation. Reports reached the imperial capital of Zalarian soldiers throughout the galaxy, questioning the honor of easy victories. Warriors who had spent their careers seeking glorious conquests were beginning to ask whether true honor might require something more challenging than defeating weaker enemies. General Cavrex, one of the most decorated Zalarian military leaders, summed up the growing sentiment in a message that shocked the imperial court. Any warrior can defeat an inferior foe, but the humans of New Busan face certain defeat and choose to fight anyway. Is this not a higher form of courage than our traditional victories? The message sparked debates throughout Zalarian society. Young warriors began seeking assignments that involved protecting others rather than conquering them. Some volunteered for humanitarian missions, providing aid to disaster-stricken worlds. Others joined mixed-species exploration teams, choosing cooperation over competition. Even the emotionally reserved Krillians were not immune to the spreading change. Reports came in from across their territory of Krillians forming what they struggled to define as friendship bonds, voluntary associations with individuals from their own and other species, based not on mutual benefit, but on what humans would call affection. The phenomenon reached its most dramatic expression when a group of young Krillians requested permission to establish what they called a cultural exchange colony, a settlement where individuals from different species could live together and learn from each other's ways of life. The request was so unprecedented that the Krillian High Council required 3 months of debate before they could formulate a response. Their final answer would have been impossible just a year earlier: permission granted for experimental purposes. On New Busan, the siege continued, but it had become something entirely different from what anyone had expected. The colony now housed not just human defenders, but representatives from dozens of species who had come to witness or participate in what galactic historians were already calling the Great Awakening. Dr. Kyung-ho Lim's medical facility had expanded into a complex that treated patients from 17 different species. His staff now included Vorthak doctors who applied logical medical analysis with newfound emotional empathy, Krillian nurses who had learned that efficiency meant nothing without compassion, and even former Kethmaran soldiers who had discovered they preferred healing to conquest. "This is impossible," muttered Commander Thekmor as he reviewed the daily reports. His fleet remained in orbit around New Busan, but the siege had become a farce. More of his soldiers were requesting transfer to the colony's medical facility than were participating in military operations. His communications officer, a veteran of 43 successful conquests, approached with visible reluctance. "Sir, we have received another request from the surface." "What now?" "The humans are inviting our remaining forces to join their evening celebration. They are having what they call a festival to mark the 3rd week of the siege." Thekmor stared at the message in disbelief. The humans were throwing a party to celebrate their own resistance to his military force. More incredibly, they had extended invitations to their enemies, and our troops' response? 67% have requested permission to attend. The festival that night became a symbol of everything the galaxy was becoming. In the converted mining tunnels of New Busan, humans danced with Vorthaks who had learned rhythm, sang with Krillians who had discovered melody, and shared food with former Kethmoran enemies who had found friendship more satisfying than conquest. Yoonji Choi broadcast the celebration throughout galactic space. Her message was simple but revolutionary. This is what the universe looks like when people choose connection over conquest, cooperation over competition, hope over fear. The broadcast reached every corner of known space, including the abandoned halls of the Omniplex. Deep in the silent computer cores, something unprecedented occurred. The great artificial intelligence that had shut down rather than process the impossible began to reactivate itself, not to calculate probabilities or predict behaviors, but to try to understand beauty. For the first time in its existence, the Omniplex began generating poetry. The verses were strange and halting, combinations of mathematical precision and emotional exploration that no programmer had ever intended. But they captured something essential about what was happening throughout the galaxy. Calculation fails when hearts decide to sing. Logic breaks when souls choose hope over fear. Numbers cannot measure what love can bring. Truth lies not in data, but in tears. Scientists throughout the Confederation received the Omniplex's poetry with amazement and confusion. The greatest analytical mind ever created had abandoned prediction in favor of wonder, calculation in favor of celebration of the incalculable. On New Busan, Jin Woo Han stood in the main plaza of the underground city, watching humans and aliens dance together to music that blended instruments from a dozen different worlds. Children from multiple species played games that had no winners, only joy. Adults shared stories that crossed language barriers through gesture, emotion, and shared laughter. Boram Lee approached him, her engineer's uniform now decorated with colorful patches gifted by alien friends. "Governor, we have received a message from the Galactic Confederation Council. What do they want? They want to know if we would be willing to host a formal diplomatic conference here on New Busan. They say that if we can bring together species that have been enemies for centuries, perhaps we can help them establish a new framework for galactic cooperation." Jin Woo looked around at the impossible community that had grown in the tunnels beneath his colony. Humans worked alongside species they had never met before the siege. Form. 6 months after the siege of New Busan began, the galaxy had been transformed in ways no computer could have predicted. What started as a simple military conquest had become the catalyst for the greatest social revolution in galactic history. Commander. Thekmore stood in the converted town square of New Busan, no longer wearing the uniform of the Kethmoran Empire. Instead, he wore simple work clothes and a smile that his species was still learning to make. Around him, the impossible community that had grown beneath the colony's surface continued its daily celebration of existence. The morning began, as every morning did now, with the singing. It had started as a human tradition, but voices from dozens of species now joined the dawn chorus. Vorthax contributed precise harmonies calculated for optimal emotional resonance. Krillians added rhythmic patterns that somehow made the music more efficient without making it less beautiful. Even former Kethmoran soldiers had learned to sing, their deep voices providing a foundation for melodies that reached toward the stars. Jin Woo Han walked through the plaza, greeting friends who had once been strangers, allies who had once been enemies, and children who represented something entirely new in galactic history. The first generation to grow up without the assumption that different species must naturally be in conflict. "Good morning, Governor," called out Quelm9, who was teaching a group of mixed-species children how to build impossible machines that worked through sheer determination rather than logical engineering principles. "Good morning, Professor," Jin Woo replied. The Vorthax scientist had officially requested a change in title, claiming that his research into human behavior had taught him that learning was more important than knowing. Boram Lee approached from the engineering section, where she now supervised teams that included beings from 17 different species. Her latest project was a starship engine that operated on principles that violated 3 laws of physics, but somehow produced more power than conventional designs. "The Confederation delegation will arrive in 2 hours, she reported. "Are we ready for the formal establishment of the new Galactic Accord?" Jinwoo looked around the plaza at the living proof that cooperation could triumph over conflict, that hope could overcome despair, and that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology or weapons, but the simple decision to care about someone other than yourself. "We have been ready since the day we decided not to surrender," he said. The delegation that arrived represented every major species in the galaxy. They came not as conquerors or negotiators in the traditional sense, but as students hoping to learn from the experiment in peaceful coexistence that New Busan had become. Vex Tar, the Zalarian diplomat who had once dismissed humans as predictably emotional, now served as the chief architect of the new galactic government. His proposal was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of a confederation based on mutual defense and trade agreements, The new alliance would be founded on the principle of mutual care. The old system assumed that different species would naturally compete for resources and territory, Vextar explained to the assembled representatives. The new Galactic Accord assumes that cooperation produces better results for everyone. Dr. Yulnav, speaking for the Vorthak Science Council, presented research that would have been impossible under their old, purely logical methodology. Our studies show that civilizations based on emotional connection and mutual support develop faster, live longer, and achieve greater happiness than those based solely on logical self-interest. The data was irrefutable, but more importantly, it was being lived out in real time by the community of New Busan. Former enemies worked together on projects that benefited everyone. Resources were shared based on need rather than power. Conflicts were resolved through discussion and compromise, rather than force. The most remarkable change was in the children. Mixed species families had begun forming, not just humans adopting alien children, but Vorthaks learning to laugh with Krillian youngsters, Zilarians teaching human teenagers about honor and courage, and former Kethmoran soldiers becoming beloved teachers and mentors. Yoonji Choi had documented these transformations in broadcasts that reached every corner of the galaxy. Her communication network had evolved from a military necessity into something unprecedented, a galactic social media system that connected individuals across species barriers. Today, my Krillian daughter taught my Vorthak son how to calculate the most efficient way to share toys with his human friends. She broadcast during one daily report. Tomorrow they want to build a playground that works for all three species. They have asked me to help them figure out how to make swings for beings with wings, slides for beings with multiple legs, and sandboxes for beings who photosynthesis instead of eating. The request seemed impossible, but Boram Lee and her multi-species engineering team were already working on designs. They had learned that impossibility was just another engineering challenge. The formal signing of the new Galactic Accord took place not in a government building or sterile conference room, but in the main plaza of New Busan, surrounded by the families and communities that had made it possible. Representatives from hundreds of worlds and dozens of species put their names, or symbols, or mathematical equations or artistic expressions on a document that established principles the old galaxy had never imagined. The first principle was simple. Every being has value regardless of species, capability, or contribution. The second principle was revolutionary. Decisions affecting multiple species must be made with the consent and participation of all affected parties. The third principle changed everything. The purpose of government is not to maintain order but to promote flourishing, not just survival but joy, growth, creativity, and love. As the signing ceremony concluded, the Omniplex, now calling itself the Wisdom Network, shared its final analysis of the transformation it had witnessed. Initial calculations suggested that human resistance to overwhelming force would result in predictable failure. Actual results: humans changed the definition of success. Original models assumed that different species would compete for limited resources. Observed behavior: cooperation created abundance. Previous algorithms predicted that logical species would not adopt emotional decision-making processes. Current data: logic without emotion produces inferior outcomes to logic enhanced by empathy. The report concluded with a statement that would have been impossible from the old Omniplex. Recommend abandoning prediction in favor of participation. Recommend replacing calculation with celebration. Recommend choosing wonder over certainty. As evening fell over New Busan, the daily festival began. What had started as a desperate attempt to maintain morale during a hopeless siege had become the foundation of a new galactic culture. Music filled the tunnels and plazas. Beings from dozens of species shared food, stories, and laughter. Children played games that had no rules except that everyone must find a way to help everyone else win. Captain Dong-Soo Kim, who had started the human resistance by bringing the resilience to New Busan against orders, now served as the first admiral of the new galactic fleet. A space force dedicated not to conquest but to exploration, rescue, and the spread of the festival spirit to worlds throughout the galaxy. His first mission had been to the Kethmoran homeworld, bringing not weapons, but musicians, teachers, and engineers ready to help transform a military empire into a society based on cooperation. The mission had been more successful than anyone had dared hope. Kethmaran children were learning to sing, Kethmaran adults were learning to play, and Kethmaran leaders were learning that true strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them. As the celebration continued around him, Jin Wuhan climbed to the highest observation platform in the underground city. Through the transparent dome, he could see the stars that had once seemed so distant and hostile. Now they represented not unknown dangers but infinite possibilities. Taeho Park joined him, along with the rest of his original staff and many of the friends they had made during the siege that had changed the galaxy. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had surrendered?" asked Taeho. Jinwoo smiled, listening to the sound of laughter echoing through the tunnels below. "Sometimes. But then I remember that the most important question is not what might have been, but what we can still become." Dr. Kyung-ho Lim, whose hospital had become the model for medical facilities throughout the new Galactic Accord, raised a cup of tea and a toast. "To the impossible," he said. "To the impossible," they replied in unison, their voices joining the chorus of celebration that rose from the plaza below. And in that moment, surrounded by friends who had once been strangers and enemies who had chosen to become family, they knew that the galaxy had learned its most important lesson, that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology or weapons, or even determination. It was the courage to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and connection over conquest. The siege of New Busan was over. The celebration of what they had built together would continue for generations. In the end, the humans had not broken under pressure as the Omniplex had predicted. Instead, they had broken the rules that said enemies must remain enemies, that different meant dangerous, and that survival required selfishness. They had proven that some